Maxon's body paint has been an integral part of the texture painting landscape within Hollywood and visual effects, animation for quite some time, close to a decade now. And despite the rapid rise of Mari, which is certainly a fantastic software and it's pushing the boundaries of what 3D texture painting can be, uh, body paint is still very relevant to the landscape and is still an oft used tool within many of the top tier animation and visual effects houses in Hollywood. What we'll be looking at in this video is the UV editing capabilities within BodyPaint. BodyPaint offers both UV editing and interactive 3D painting right on the model, and that's really what separated itself from the other tools in the industry, leading to the introduction of Mari. So what we're going to do right now in this video is again take a look at how we can unwrap a UV mesh from this 3D model and prepare it for texture painting. So one thing is to kind of understand the relationship between a UV map and the actual geometric mesh. And so at the core, what you're trying to do is you have a 2D texture. So think about having a printout of your head, and you're trying to take a flat piece of paper with a picture of your head and wrap it around your head in a way that works and fits to your actual head in a believable way. And that's what we're doing with UV maps. So for this head, we're taking a 2D map and wrapping it around this model and trying to make it work. So we have lots of tools in here. I'm going to choose the BodyPaint UV edit mode, and right now if I select the cube, which is actually my head, here is the UV mesh. It's a mess. What you don't want to have in a UV mesh is overlapping elements, because that means anywhere you texture paint, you're going to have front and back facing results. It just ends up in a mess. So number one, I'm going to turn off the subdivision surface here so I can kind of get a more realistic view of what I have geometric wise compared to what I have UV wise. When beginning this process, you're going to use the Paint Setup Wizard. And this is the same whether you're creating a new UV unwrap, or if you are just working on a material, you already have your UVs. The same would be said here. You'll choose some different options, but you're typically going to use the Paint Setup Wizard to begin. So I select this option, and here I'm just going to turn off the left and right eye objects. I don't need them enabled here. I'm not creating materials or unwrapping UVs for those objects at this time. I just want to make sure that the cube is highlighted here. And I'm going to say next. And I'm going to mark recalculate UVs because I have not yet established the UVs for this mesh. Right now they're a complete mess. So I'm going to say next. In here, it's looking at the last used options that I had. So I created a 2K texture. Maybe for this I want a 4K texture. So I'll just say 4096, excuse me, 4096 by 4096. And by establishing the max and the min is the same, you're guaranteed to get that number. So I'm creating a 4K texture. It doesn't really matter as far as the materials here. I can actually not even use any of these materials. I'm really just laying out the UVs at this point. But I'm just going to accept the color and bump channel. I'm going to say finish, and it's going to create a UV mesh that is fully functional, as you can see here in the texture view. We don't have the overlapping UV mesh fractions that we had before, but we don't exactly have a great surface to paint on. We have all these seams that will come into play. Though we have the ability to projection paint, which helps us with those seams, it's still not a good way to work. So we're going to have to address that. So what happens is after you pull in the BodyPaint 3D Setup Wizard, you get this result. You can see here we have our 4K texture. It's 4096 by 4096. Let's say okay. Okay. Close. And now I'm ready to start working on the mesh. So there's a few things I can do here. Number one, I would like to determine the seam or seams that will be created on this mesh. I don't want Cinema 4D and BodyPaint just to assign this randomly. I want to be in control of where these seams are going to be. So to do that, the best option is to go into Edge mode. So I click on Edge mode here, and there's some very good selection tools. If I press the V key, I can go to Select Path Selection. And so what I'm going to do here is set up the seam for my head mesh here. So that's not exactly what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line. Yowzer. Across the top. To create a seam at the top of the head there. And that's basically where the hairline is going to be, so it's well hidden. And then I'm going to create the vertical down the back. So once I've established the selection, oops, let me just fix this one thing. So I'm just holding the shift key as we can with the selection tool to add to that existing edge selection. And then I just control drag to remove that front part from the selection. So once I have this all established, I just need to make sure within the object manager that I don't have a selection already selected, because if I had a selection tag highlighted here, this would override that. So I'm just making sure there's nothing selected, and the way to clear that is just click in empty space in the object manager, click back on your file, and then go to Select, Set Selection. Now we have this, and I don't really need to rename it because it's the only edge selection I'm going to have. And what you'll see is here I've already established a point selection. Just show you what that is. That is the original origin points for when I was creating a symmetrical mesh. So I want to make sure that's not highlighted as I go through this process. So now I'm ready to make a new point selection. So I'm going to go into points mode to do this. So I'm going to select my cube. I'm in point mode. I'm going to click off on everything so that nothing is selected. And I'm going to grab a few points that I basically want to pin to the UV plane. I don't want these points to move. I want them to be stationary, and they'll kind of give me a center point for everything else to unwrap. So I'm just going to go in and click a few points here to use as my pinpoints. So I've grabbed these 4 points. I have nothing selected here. I go to Select, Set Selection, and again, I'll change this to Pin points. And then now it's time to look at the actual unwrapping process. So when we look in the UV mapping tab of the UV edit layout, so you look here, we have layers, brushes, swatches. Those all deal with the actual painting of our UV mesh. In this case, we're just working on the fundamentals. We're working on actually laying out the UV mesh in a way that is best prepared for us to actually go in and paint. So here I have some preserve selections. I don't need these highlighted because these are looking again at previous files that I've done. So I want those cleared out. I'm going to add the pinpoints under Relax UV. So what's happening is we have optimal mapping, just different types of mapping. We have Relax UV, which is what we're going to use here in just a moment to get the mesh to unwrap the way we want it. We have projection, which is very important. This is going to be the first step in determining the main view of our UV map. We have transform options and UV commands for kind of higher level editing functions. So we're going to start again with the projection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the polygon mode here. I'm going to press Command A, which is going to select all of my UV mesh components. And I'm going to go to the front view. I could just line this up in the camera, but I'm just going to go to the front view, line everything up to the center, and choose flat. And watch what happens to the mesh here. Flat. So what happens is I fill the UV plane with the view that I'm looking through in the viewport. So this frontal view. So already I've done half the job of getting the front of this face nice and square to my UVs. The problem is I have elements that are overlapping. The back of the head is, of course, behind our face. The inner mouth is all behind the lips. The nostrils are behind the nose. The inner ears are hidden by the cheeks. So there's a lot of overlapping UV mesh that needs to be corrected before we can correctly paint on this on these UVs. So what we're going to do now is, after we've set that flat projection from the front, we're going to go to the Relax UV tab. So this is where it's actually going to evaluate our mesh, evaluate our UVs, and unwrap them in a way so we don't have any overlapping UVs. So I'm going to use the pin point selection and the cut selected edges options to determine exactly how this unwrapping operation is going to happen. So I'm going to drag the point selection to the pinpoints selection I just made to the pinpoints selection field. I'm going to use the edge selection that I made and drag that to the cut selected edges. You have a couple of modes of relaxing. I'm going to use the LSCM mode, and I'm going to click Apply with Auto Realign enabled. And let's see what happens. Voila. So now it has split this mesh based on the edge cuts that I've made, the edge selection I made. It's cut it along those edges, and it's pinned those points to their location so that they don't move. So it gives us a center point and then unwraps the mesh accordingly to the edges we established in the edge selection. So as I zoom in here, you see that the inner mouth is now nice and unwound. There's no overlapping polygons in the UV mesh. Same thing with the nostrils, and same thing with the eyes. So everything is now nicely unwrapped. And the one thing I could do here is that you think about your texture size. So here we've created a 4K texture. We want to maximize the UV plane to get the most out of whatever that size is we've determined. So if we've got a 4K texture, we don't really want to have all this room down here. We're really only painting in 3/4 of this 4K texture. So we're really at 3,000 by 3,000 in pixels when we have a full 4,000 over 4,000 by 4,000 frame to work in. So the last thing I'm going to do here is look at UV commands, and I'm just going to say fit UV to canvas. And so now that's going to pull everything and maximize our UV mesh to the canvas size that we've established, in this case a 4K texture. With that done, we are now ready to go in and texture paint on this UV map. So that's just one key aspect of body paint within Cinema 4D. Keep in mind that it's a two-tier system. You have UV unwrapping, UV editing, and you have the actual 3D painting engine within BodyPaint. And both of these tools are just outstanding. They're top of their class, and I can't stress enough how important it is that you learn the basics of BodyPaint, because it can really bring another level to your 3D compositions. When you understand how to properly unwrap a UV and apply textures correctly, you're just going to be able to raise the level of work that you can create within Cinema 4D. So hopefully in this exercise you've learned the keys to unwrapping a UV mesh, and in other videos we're going to take a look at actually painting on these meshes within BodyPaint in Cinema 4D.